Okay, good morning to all of you, and thank you, Dr. Ramarao, for this invitation to talk on this topic in this event. Like this topic, as it says, machine learning in SAR data analysis. So it is. I work as you have seen, I work in the area of SAR data analysis, also data analysis, and machine learning, of course, as one of those. In this talk, I will not be emphasizing on all the tools and techniques which you will be needing for machine learning, but I'll just walk you through various things which we have done in the past and we are still continuing, and just trying to understand how we can use machine learning in in general, in remote sensing, as we all of you, me, all of us belong to this geospatial analysis data. And the idea is that can can we use machine learning from from a domain knowledge point of view, not just utilizing it as a black box, what mostly we do and which should not be done. So I'll be emphasizing mostly on this aspect during my talk in this machine learning in SAR analysis. But before we go into machine learning, let us try to get some very briefly the background of remote sensing and mostly the SAR remote sensing. So as you all know, in remote sensing, what we are doing, we are just playing around with this electromagnetic spectrum. Either we are in the shorter wavelength where we use optical sensor, or we are in the domain of longer wavelength where we use the microwave electromagnetic wave in the microwave domain. We either have active sensors or we have the passive sensors. And as you can see that in the active sensor in red, where I put those, in that you have those radar remote sensing we do in that particular wavelength, and those are different bands which we utilize. You see X, C, L, and other so on and so forth. So as you can see, this is in the longer wavelength domain, and we are utilizing as an active sensor. But you can also use it as a passive, where you have the radiometers. So this is well known to you, nothing new. It's just that we are dealing with this. What are different kind of sensors we have? We have the two different kinds of sensor. We can have either an imaging or a non-imaging sensor. In the non-imaging sensor, we have the radiometers, we have the radar scatterometers and the altimeters. Radiometers are passive, the scatterometer and altimeters are active in nature. In the imaging modality, we have the optical sensors, the optical remote sensing, you have the thermal remote sensing, and the other one is the radar sensor. So this is where my talk will be all about during this presentation, about utilizing the radar imaging sensor. Radar is not new to us. It is nothing new. I mean, we all know about it and since a long time. If you go back to the history, you can see that in 1904, radar was patented by Christian Hülsmeyer from Germany. And this is the beginning of radar. But it was not used to do anything of imaging or whatever we are doing it now. It was a patent which was given. But later, I mean, what we do with radar? What can we do? So it's just nothing but detecting and ranging synonym. It transmits pulse traveling with the velocity of light, and we have some of this energy which is reflected back towards the radar, and this is what we measure. This is what we are doing when we are doing utilizing radar for measurements. And this, what we are measuring back, is called the radar backscatter, and we call it as a sigma and naught. This is what a radar is measuring. More specifically, if you want to say that, it is sometimes we call it as a normalized radar backscatter coefficient. Why it is normalized? Because when we say that this energy which is received by the sensor is in comparison to the energy scattered by an isotopic scatterer. So this is what we normally use, and we utilize this sigma naught in decibel scale. So what happens in this case is that if you have the backscatter coefficient to be positive, that means you are having a reflection or the scattering towards the radar, and if you have it to be negative, it's it away from the radar. And this is how we do the measurements. Typically, if you just see typically, they are, well, it's not a very limited, but if you say when we have high backscatter, when we say this is maybe from man-made object, you have some terrain slopes which are facing towards the radar. Either you have a very rough surface where you're looking at. You have high backscatter when you have rough surface, vegetation possibly, moderately agriculture, again moderately rough, and low when you have smooth surface or calm water where you do not get anything back to your sensor. Everything just goes away from the sensor. So it's very, very low. So you can just kind of understand them slightly or just for the first hand information about this typical backscatter coefficient. But this is all about measurement. But what came later? What you have is that the patent of what we today we use as a synthetic aperture radar was given by Carl Willey in 1954 while he was working in the Goodyear Aerospace Corporation. Then he gave this a patent, which we today we use, of course, with a lot of sophistication and modification. And this is what is the starting point of the synthetic aperture radar, which we now know, and this is how the sensors are built. So the imaging geometry is very particular about for the SAR sensors. It's a side-looking business. It's looks at the side. So you have the synthetic aperture. So it is this, the sensor is moving in this direction. This is the azimuth, and you have it's looking on the slant, in the slant way over here in the ground. So unlike the optical, where you just say resolution of a pixel, here we just have something little bit different. We talk about two kinds of resolution. One is range resolution, which basically depends on the bandwidth of the received signal, and it is given in terms of this. So this is the speed of light and the bandwidth. And you have another resolution, which is the azimuth resolution, and it depends upon, as you can see, the synthetic aperture, so the synthesized antenna beam width, and so on and so forth. And at the end, what you get is very simple, is that the azimuth resolution is nothing but half the along track antenna length. So if you just do the computation, you see that, well, this is very simple. It is just half the antenna length. That means if I just go on decreasing the antenna length, I get very high resolution. Of course, you can go to a certain limit. Of course, there are limitations depending upon the electronics. But as you can see, it's simple, and they do not have any relationship. So these are two different resolutions. You have a range resolution and an azimuth resolution. Now, the question comes is, well, what do we get out of it? So let us try to look into a simple problem. Comparing it with a real radar and a synthetic aperture radar. So what the difference is that if I have a real aperture radar, now what you see is that I have a real aperture radar, and I see this is, I get the equation for the range resolution. The azimuth, the range resolution with the azimuth resolution, if you can see, is very high. You see, this is around 60 meter, or it's kilometer, depending upon the height of which the antenna is. So this is the resolution which you have in the azimuth, the range resolution being the same. But if you look into the synthetic aperture radar, you immediately see that the azimuth resolution is nothing but LA by 2. In this case, it will be 5 meters only, 10 by 2. So you see, we have a very high resolution in this case, which we cannot get if we have the real aperture. So this is a beauty which we have, and this is what we are utilizing in the synthetic aperture radar, is that we could get high resolution, high azimuth resolution, utilizing this trick of synthesizing an antenna by the motion of the sensor. So this is the difference. Another thing which comes into play is the polarization. We all know, we have already read about it. This is nothing but an intrinsic property of an electromagnetic wave. So what is it? It is nothing but the locus of the electromagnetic wave as it moves in space. So you can have either the green, which is the horizontally polarized, and you have the blue as the vertically polarized. And if you have a combination of them, so as you can see, you can have in a very particular case, you can have a circular polarization,
Good morning.
but in
डॉक्टर मैंने
any other
आपको वो
case,
लाइट सोर्स का वाटर सोर्स का मैप कर सेंड कर दिया JPO.
or in any other case, you in a general case, you will is important. Why it is important to have polarization? As I mentioned, this is an intrinsic property of an electromagnetic wave, and utilizing it, I would be able to get some of the intrinsic information about scatterer. That means what we are looking at for Earth observation. And this is exactly what we'll be looking at and we'll be using. How can we distinguish between scattering? One, we have something called a coherent, and the other one which we call as incoherent. Now, what do they mean? It's simple. Something, if you see, this is a coherent way. Everything gives you, you have sent the wave which is in some polarization, but you're getting it back in the similar kind of polarization. So it's everything is proper. So everything is in coherent nature. But nature is not that. It's not in an ideal case, you have something which is, so you can see it's all mixed up. So if you see that there is a problem over here. So that means everything is not coherent over here. It's we are dealing over here. If you have a coherent, we are dealing with something like a completely polarized case. But if it is incoherent, which we call as the partially polarized wave, which means that it's a combination of completely polarized and unpolarized wave. So it's a mixture, you can say. So this is what is reality, but you can also have this kind of situation also. So this is how we analyze the scattering that we have from a target, let's say on the Earth surface, which since we are talking about Earth observation over here. So, so the idea is that, well, now you can stop and think, yes, this is what I get as the measurement from a radar sensor. I have a sensor with me which uses radar, microwave data. I send the pulses towards the surface, it gets scattered, and I am receiving something back at my sensor. And this is my measurement. This measurement, as I mentioned over here, is this S. This guy over here is the measurement. And this is a complex matrix because as I need to have a representation of the data. And this data, in the very primitive case, is a 2 cross 2 complex matrix. So this is what my measurement is. But when I have such kind of a condition where I have completely polarized, but as I said, well, it is not as such in ideal condition in reality. So in this case, maybe I won't be able to utilize this S matrix because it is utilized over here when everything is completely polarized. So the next question comes to my mind is, let us wait and understand what can we use then. The next obvious question which comes to mind is that we need to have a statistical description of it, which means that, well, this measurement in terms of a coherent is not what we are looking at, but we will need to have a statistical measurement of this. Now, how do we do that? Let's quickly go through the representation of the data, just to give you an overall view of how the data is represented. We are not doing anything with that now. Normally, as I mentioned, when you have sent a wave and received it, that the receive, you are measuring it. This is the measurement, what is called as a scattering matrix. It contains 4 elements, 2 cross 2. Each one of them over here is a complex number, which means it has an amplitude and a phase. So this is a 2 cross 2 complex. and the diagonals over here, they are equal. So xy is equal to yx in a backscattering case. This is just assume it. So this is what we have as a measurement. But this is, as I said, this is good when you have such a condition, when you have this. But what do I do if I have an incoherent one? What I do is that I change this into another representation. So I go from a vectorization of the scattering, and then after that, what I do is I do an averaging. This is all you do an every day. What is this? This is nothing but a covariance structure. And you use covariance structure in many applications which you do every day. So what I'm doing it over here is something similar, but it's just that I have a complex matrix over here. It's a covariance matrix. It's a 3 cross 3 complex covariance matrix. The question is, why do I have two? One T and written as C? Is just because I can use different basis matrices. Why two different basis matrices? Again, the question is that, well, there are two different representations. Without going into much detail, they are just two different representations and they are useful in their own ways. But just to give you an overview is that both of them are covariance structure. That means this measurement now is a covariance structure. And remember what I said in my last slide is that this is good when I have a coherent measurement, but when I have an incoherent one, I need a statistical description, and this is my statistical description. Nothing but a covariance structure as a complex matrix. And this is all about the representation, either utilizing a 2 cross 2 complex matrix or utilizing a 3 cross 3 complex matrix. But there is another representation which is not used so much, but it's a beautiful representation, because as you know, I mean, we can know that as human, we always try to stick to something real. Imaginary complex gives us kind of a fear, so it's not very obvious sometimes to work with complex quantities and all. So there is a representation which is called as a Kenau representation by the person named Kenau. This is a 4 cross 4 real. It gives the same information. I will not go into detail of that, but it gives the same information, but it's a real in nature, and it is equivalent for both of them. The representation is equivalent. So you can see that all the elements over here, 4 cross 4, 16 elements over here are real. Why I put a 10 over here? Because since this matrix is symmetric, I just take the diagonal and the upper diagonal of it. So it's a 10 element. But you can see that this is a simple way of also analyzing it. Either I utilize the 2 cross 2 for the coherent, or I use the 3 cross 3 to get the statistical description of it, or I can use the real representation in Kenau. And that's all about the representation. I have a sensor, a SAR synthetic aperture radar sensor. I send my signal. I have the scattering from different targets from the Earth's surface, and I measure it. I measure it in the S matrix, and if I want to do it for the incoherent one, I go into finding out the covariance structure of it, and then from there onwards, I utilize them for different kinds of applications, different kinds of study, different kinds of algorithm development, and so on. But the very basic and the fundamental is the utilization of this matrix. Now, the thing is, now we have these three matrices we have seen. We have this the representation, which is in terms of a 3 cross 3. We have seen which is the coherency and the covariance, so that two covariance structure. We have seen we have something as an S matrix, which is, as I mentioned, the primitive one where we have the coherent, and we have something over here as a real. Now, are they related?
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Hello?
Sir, you got disconnected.
Yeah, sorry, there was a problem connection. Can I share it again?
Yeah, yes, sir, sure.
Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sorry for that. Yeah. So, so as I was mentioning, I was in this slide. So there is a relationship between them. If you can go from the S to the K, from the T to the C, and you can go from one to the other also. But as you can see, there is a red line which says that you cannot come back from these to the S matrix. Why? Simple, because you have already done over here an averaging. An incoherent averaging is already done over here. So there's no way you can go back to an S matrix. Because this is now a full rank matrix, you cannot have a rank 1 matrix going back to them. So it's not possible to go back to this one, but otherwise all other combinations are possible. So this is now the representation, and you can go from one to the other depending upon your preferences or depending upon your application and so on. So let us go back to an image to start with. How do an image from a radar or synthetic aperture radar fully polarimetric image looks like? This is an image from a Google Earth image, which you already always see, and this is a representation, or this is the image what you see from a synthetic aperture radar. This is nothing but a false color composite, as you see on any optical image. But the false color composite have its own meaning. I will not go into detail over here now, but as you can see, you have a red and a green and a blue. And sorry. And each one of them, the colors, they have their own physical interpretation. And that's very important for us when we are doing remote sensing with polarimetric SAR image, because this physical interpretation means a lot to us. How, if you try to look into the individual bands, so you can look at the individual bands, why not? What is it? If we look into the individual band, this band is an HH. It means I send an horizontal polarization, polarized wave. It gets scattered from the target and I receive an horizontal. So this one measurement is my measurement which I have in the HH polarization. I go to the next one, which is, I call it as a cross polarization. I send an H, but I receive the V, the vertical polarization. I send an horizontal, receive a vertical polarization. This is how the image looks like. Very different from this one. And I can have another one, is that I can send a vertical one and I receive a vertical one. This looks also totally different from this one again. So this is the three images which I have with me. I can have individually bands, I can see them. But if you look carefully, well, they may not be so informative in the first go, in the first look. Can we have kind of a combination of them? I mean, can I combine them? As I said, this is the absolute, that means this is the amplitude information, because as I said, HH itself is a complex quantity. So I took the mode of that and just made it into a dB scale, just to have a contrast. There's nothing but a log stretch. So what is it? It is the amplitude image of it. So can I combine the bands in the complex domain and then do something? Well, yes, possibly yes. So if I do that, I get something like this. This is what you have seen is the image, which is the false color composite. And as I mentioned, how do I do that? How do I make this false color composite? As I mentioned, my scattering information is very important when I'm doing remote sensing with polarimetric SAR data. So the first one I call it as the A0, which is the T11, which is nothing but I combine them. You see, I combine the HH and the VV. So it's combination, it's done in the complex. And then I take the modulus of that. And this corresponds to something like scattering, which is from an odd bound scattering, and from which coming from a single bounce or an odd bound scattering, roughness kind of thing. So what you can see on the sea surface, it's higher. which is obvious. I do another one, which is the even bound scattering. What I do an HH minus of VV, regular modulus of that. And it has a meaning. This is corresponding to something which is even bound. You see that the urban areas are quite high, brighter. Here also it is bright. I'm not saying it is not bright over here, but compared to this is much more brighter over here. This is the urban area. This is the San Francisco Bay Area. So this is the one which corresponds to HH minus V, but you can see on the water it is low. It is very dark compared to here where you have good high amount. And then I have this one as a cross one. I keep this one as a cross one. So if I utilize these three and I put this as the blue, sorry, if I put this as the blue, this as the red, and this as the green, I get this false color composite. And as you can see, each one of them have their own meaning in the domain of scattering. So there is a physical justification of physics behind it when I am dealing with these kind of images. Well, I'm sure you are dealing with all different kinds of images, and all of them have their own properties, reflection, scattering, and so on. So the idea is this has its own scattering meaning. So next I go, this talk is about machine learning, but I start with something which is no machine learning. Start with that. So I try to give you an understanding of clustering, image clustering, using only the intrinsic information which is there, which comes from the physics of scattering. This is of course true for polarimetric SAR data, but this is true for any remote sensing data. It can be your optical data, your multispectral, it can be hyperspectral, LiDAR. They have their own physical meaning. Since I'm doing it with polarimetric SAR data, I'll be talking about the physics of scattering in this case. So I do an image clustering with no machine learning. Can I do that? So that means I just try to find out some parameters. I just try to extract some information out of it. I'll not go into detail of how do I do that. That's a different subject altogether. But believe me that I have some tools and techniques where I can extract some kind of information from the fully polarimetric SAR data, and I'm calling that as scattering type, the first information. I mean, just to give just what can you think of as the scattering type means? Scattering type, some say something like this. The same image, I put into a scattering type with a bounded scale, which goes from 0 to 90. 0 corresponds to something which is over here, corresponds to an odd bounce mechanism. Single bounce or odd bounce. You have the wave coming and it is scattered in an odd number of times, either a single 1 or 3 or 5 and so on. This is characterized by this lower end. If it is pure, the more purer it is, the more you have towards 0. And when as you have starting to get mixture, it goes higher up over here. The other extreme corresponds to something like an even bounce. This is odd, this is even, where you have double bounce. You have 2 bounces, 4 bounces, and so on. The more purer it is, it goes to over here at 90. So as you can see, I have a bounded information. So this is a parameter which I have extracted from my polarimetric SAR data using some algorithm. Don't have to worry about it. So this gives me information of a scattering type. Why it is scattering type? Because if I have a water body over here, as you have seen in the previous example, this is very coherent over here. Nothing, the wave is more or less polarized. But as you can see over here, this is an urban area. Urban area over here, this is a reddish one. It should have been towards something over here towards the 90, but it is not exactly towards that, is somewhere in between, let's say 60, 70 over here. That means I am towards something as an even bounce, but there is a mixture. So that's why I'm something over here. And this scale is continuous. Here I have some vegetation, something over here also, some vegetation over here. And so it is, well, there are something over here. It's again a combination of some mixture of surface, but something a mixture over here, which is a randomness. So this gives me an information about the type of scattering. The two extremities, it's bounded and a continuous scale. The next one is the purity in scattering. How much it is pure. It's something like an index. You have all used so many type of different kind of indexes you have used in optical data. I am sure you have used different kind of index. The simple one you have used is, I'm sure everyone uses an NDVI index, or you have used something a different kind of index, and they are all bounded either between -1 to 1 or between 0 and 1 and so on. This is an index which is called purity index between 0 and 1. If you have 1, it is very pure, totally pure. If you have 0, it is totally unpure, low scattering purity, high scattering. So if you see again, as I said, the water body over here is highly pure in sense. Urban one is well, not so much pure. There is some mixture, and this area which is vegetation is less less pure. So it's more impure in that sense. It's not so much over here, but somewhere over here mixture. So these are the two different parameters I've extracted utilizing some in some techniques, some algorithms which comes from the scattering physics. So the idea is, can I just utilize them to get as clustering? No a priori information, no learning, nothing over here. Just two parameters extracted from the very basic, from the very fundamental of remote sensing, the very fundamental of polarimetric SAR data. So without any learning, without any a priori knowledge, nothing, I can just do a segmentation of this data based on this. So I can easily put them, compute the pixel values, the two values, the PGD, which is the purity, and the alpha underscore, which is the scattering type, and you just put them in on this clustering. The divisions are made from prior knowledge of, again, scattering physics. This is nothing but less than 0.5, greater than 0.5, and the other over here on this axis is from some other domain knowledge. So I'm just utilizing my domain knowledge, which is there. I'm computing these two parameters, just putting them on this plane, and see where they belong to. And if you can see, I can just have a very nice clusters, 8 clusters of them. So there is no machine learning. There is no learning at all. It's just purely depending on my knowledge about the domain. Everything comes from a domain. That's why I said no machine learning, only scattering physics. And this is what I get, a clustering, which nicely clusters this image into 8 different clusters. A second method, which is also very powerful, is that I can also utilize again 2 different kinds of mechanisms, scattering parameters coming from different. This is coming from a polarimetric SAR data. This is coming from a compact, 2 different kinds of sensor acquisition, and I can easily divide them into different properties, and I can put them into different clusters. Here I can have 12 clusters. This is a polar representation, a different representation, but again, no a priori knowledge. Again, this comes from the knowledge about the domain. The 2 parameters which you have, one over here on this axis, is again the scattering type. This one, which is the theta, as I mentioned, this is nothing an angular one. The angular one comes from a scattering type, and the radial one talks about some kind of a purity. So some purity in scattering and some type in scattering. Just as you have seen the last example, this is a different one, but they almost come from a similar idea, similar knowledge. It's just that there's some refinement, there are some changes a little bit here and there, depending upon the knowledge of what about the scattering, but they all have their own meaning, and these are all profound. They have a profound meaning which is based on this scattering physics. So this is what I want to say before I move into machine learning something. So the idea is that I'm able to do clustering, which is a very the simple thing, which is done, the first thing which you do, and this is done without the knowledge of machine learning. Now let's slowly move into some applications. Of course, I will not teach machine learning over here. I'll just tell you the same thing, how you can do machine learning, but you have to stop and think and then apply. It's not that something is available and you are just taking it and applying it to whatever remote sensing you are doing. Optical, remote sensing, multispectral, hyperspectral, LiDAR, SAR, whatever. It doesn't make much sense in that case. It's always very important to actually, first of all, go with the very first principle, the fundamental knowledge. Knowledge about the data which you are using, and then knowledge about, of course, the background, in of course whichever background you are working. Some people are working in the in some utilizing for urban areas, some people are utilizing for forestry, for agriculture, for geological application. So you have your own background. Depending upon that background and the data which you have knowledge, then you utilize whatever machine learning tools you want to use, just not off the shelf anything. Before I move to show you the examples which utilizes machine learning and radar remote sensing, I like this very much. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It means that you have machine learning, deep learning at your disposal, doesn't mean that should be the one to be used. So there is a mindset always. People are saying that, well, I'm just, I have a hammer, I'm just looking for the nail. It should not be in that way. So this is very nice. I like it very much. This is by Abraham Maslow, who is a psychologist, a US American psychologist. And he says very nicely, and this is exactly what we are dealing with today, is that, well, we are utilizing machine learning and deep learning everywhere, maybe without paying much attention all the time. So going to machine learning. This is a mind map of machine learning. I use it for myself, so I thought maybe I can share that with you, because I always forget what is where. So many things are there, and you have to just look around what's there. So machine learning, you have, I just put them into a classical one. I said it's a reinforcement learning, ensemble learning, and neural nets and deep learning. So I just try to make them in a different arrangement so that it's a mind map and you are able to just look at them and say which one to use, where to use, and so on and so forth. So there are so many things are there. I mean, I know you are all working on them, and maybe you know which one to use for. Just in this, for this domain, this talk, I'll be just talking about over here. The first one is just to use some of the ensemble learning and some dimensional reduction one which is this basically the TSNE plot we'll be looking at over here. What we are doing over here, we are utilizing machine learning as an ensemble methods, which is the first one. And you have from decision tree to you have the optimized gradient boosting algorithm and so on. So there are so many things which you can do. We'll just look into the random forest and then extreme gradient boosting algorithms for a particular application. Now this particular application is for agriculture. This is for crop. We are doing work which is on agriculture. And this is what is important to understand, is that how can we utilize polarimetric SAR data, utilize a machine learning technique, do a classification, clustering, but with the knowledge, again, as I mentioned, I will always be mentioning that with the knowledge of the domain. Is it possible to do? How? The question is that. So here we have different acquisition of RADARSAT-2, which is a fully polarimetric sensor from the Canadian Space Agency. We have data sets from India and of course Canada, which we are doing it for a long time. And the idea is that to extract some features out. So in this case, I just use the representation. I just use the data as the representation in terms of the Kano matrix. As you have seen, this is the real matrix I'm talking about here again. This is the real matrix. I have the diagonal elements and I have the off-diagonal elements over here. Now I just extract those out. I represent the data in this. I extract those out, those 10 elements over here, and I put them into a machine learning, and I try to see what happens over there. So if I try to understand and I just try to see that how the diagonal elements which are there on the diagonal, how they behave on the different kinds of crops, because these are something which is real. These are real physical entity. I have the data measured, so I should be getting different information from these different kinds of crops which have totally different geometries and many other things. If I try to see that and I see that, well, they have variations on the diagonal element, and it is interesting to see that they have on certain elements which are on the off diagonal corresponding to some of the crops. And this is interesting to find out that I have here different crops, 4 different crops: banana, cotton, sugar cane, and rice, with different structures, of course, as you know and you have seen. And these elements behave in a different way. If I try to plot them using the TSNE plot, which is coming from a dimensional reduction plot, I'm able to see the cluster formation. If I see the same thing for the Manitoba case, which is for the Canada, again for diagonal elements which have totally different crops, I have wheat, canola, soybean, and corn. I am able to see again variations in the diagonal elements, and the same thing happens, of course, for different crops. I get different kinds of information coming from, again, the off diagonal element. So what's the motivation? The motivation is that I am utilizing a machine learning technique over here, random forest and extreme gradient boosting forest. Here, I want to do a classification utilizing these ensemble methods, but with a background knowledge of what I am putting inside these machines. Because of the fact that I am utilizing this kind of data sets, polarimetric SAR data set, and I'm using it for some real quantity, which are these crops. And if I see that, here I get very nice different clusters formation. So that means when I'm utilizing these elements from information extracted from a polarimetric SAR data, I'm able to get information, and the final product is a classification output. Well, that's the end. But what is there in between? What is there in between is the information, or what you want to understand, the insight of what's going on. The matrix elements helps understanding the geometry, orientation, row structure, possibly many other things, because this is what the real structure is. You have these different ways of putting them together. Either you are putting them as a day-wise stack or a time series stack. You can do it in different ways. So when I do it in different ways, do they matter? Yes, they matter. And how? So those are the things which makes it very interesting to analyze them for different kind of classifications, but utilizing fully polarimetric SAR data. Next thing I go into, what people talk about a lot, is this deep learning thing. And how are they related? I always have this question, and it's not always clear. Deep learning is a multi-layered model, of course, that help represent the data with different levels of abstraction. What we have is an abstract information in all these multiple levels. So either we have this one, or maybe this structure, because machine learning and deep learning definitely helps to develop AI. However, AI doesn't necessarily have to be developed using machine learning. Yes. So although machine learning makes AI much more convenient, so something like this maybe. It's up to you to choose which one do you choose. So this is, I try to question. Deep learning, in 80s, we all know we are neural networks. It was used a lot. Now we have deep learning. So you have multiple hidden layers, and there is a hierarchical representation. The question always comes is, how many layers considered in deep learning No answer to that. Is there any deep learning apart from neural network? You always make a deep learning with a neural network basis, but is there any other way you can do that? When do we need deep learning? This is a question. Maybe it's not be able to answer anyone. I do not have any answer to this. So the idea is that, well, you utilize it, but sensibly. And the second thing is what I am mentioning all the time is utilizing the domain knowledge. And that's where things are going. If you look into the literature, or if you are following different conferences and people who are working in this, there is something which is called as physics aided machine learning, physics aided deep learning. Or so this is what is now upcoming, because we are doing remote sensing, we are doing geospatial, so we have our own background. Machine learning algorithms are borrowed from somewhere. You are utilizing them, modifying them, making it something new according to your needs. So this is what is required. And I always try to incorporate this in all my lectures and all my work, is that deep learning with physics. So that means how to use physics to guide a deep learning model. And here physics can come from anywhere. I mean, it is after all your domain. Simply here I can have, so the question over here is how to use this model, how to use physics to guide a deep learning. When I say this, I get this question, that how do you, when you are saying it, how do I use it? And I say it in two ways. Well, you can have other ways also. If you can find out, let me know. But at the moment, I can look into two different ways of doing it. Either you do a feature engineering which is based on your model, based on your physics model. You are doing something, you have a background of what you are doing. You have, there's a physics model which is driving those things. So you have the data, you do this physics based model and you get an output, and that maybe you can incorporate in your database model, or this is your wherever you're doing a neural network and deep learning from here, and then do predictions, classification, regression, and so on. So that means here I have a feature engineering done by us, because it's not that I'm just giving it over here alone, but there is another path over here which is going the output of my feature engineering, which I have control of, where I know my domain, I know what's going on. This is one way of guiding it. The other way of guiding it, when you are doing it in the loss function, you have a loss function. So this is data plus a physics driven loss function. That means I have the loss function, but there I can also incorporate a loss function, which again comes from your domain knowledge. And this is, I call it a physical inconsistency. If you are working with atmospheric maybe data, you can put some of the atmospheric I don't know, inconsistency which you can have in your model. It's not only data driven. You can incorporate over here in your loss function something which is driven by your knowledge. So that means here possibly I can use it in two ways. Either I use as feature engineering, or I use it as a loss function driven. So let us go to the next one and look into, well, there are many ways we can have deep learning, neural network based, but in this talk, mostly I'll be talking about the autoencoder based work. So autoencoders, of course, well, there is a difference between when you do a PCA and an autoencoders. PCA also is used for dimension reduction, but here autoencoders are not linear, unlike the PCA, which are linear, and they are very highly efficient in many different cases. What you are doing is you're having a high dimensional, you're compressing it to a low dimensional, but maintaining some of the things. What you are doing is, the basic thing is that you have your data and you are doing a reconstruction of the same. What you're doing is you're minimizing a reconstruction error between your data and the reconstruction over here. And this is in between, you have the code. So this is what I am utilizing. So I have the input, I have the encoder, I have the code, and I have the decoder. And at the end, I have the output, which is the same as I want to do it as the input. And this is, so the latent variables over here play an important role. What I'm trying to find out is this loss function over here, where one of them is a reconstruction loss, the other is a regularizer, which is nothing but just a divergence measure over here. This is a Kullback-Leibler divergence. This is standard. I'm not doing anything at all. But what I'm trying to say over here, when you are doing it, let's say this is your input, which is your synthetic aperture radar polarimetric data. And you are trying to find out a representation of that over here. And you are trying to find out this reconstruction loss and regularizer. So you are trying to do an encoder decoder. And here in between, this is the code. So this is what you want to pick out and put it in your any machine learning algorithm. Simple as such. You can just utilize them. The idea is that information is hidden over here. But as you can understand, it is an abstract information. What does it mean? That is coming from here to here into the reconstruction. There is a lot of nonlinear transformation which has happened in between. So the Z over here may look something very weird if you just want to see them. But maybe sometimes they have some meaning. But what kind of meaning are there? I'll just try to show you an example. So this is what I will be using over here are the autoencoders. And I'll be utilizing the code in. So I'll go through them, through the examples quickly. I'll just look into the different kinds of autoencoder. We have autoencoder, the variational autoencoder, the denoising, sparse, and so on. So we'll not go into all of them in detail. Let's go with an example. I do it for first example is for Arban classification. It's very, very important because it's growing. Arban, and can we do a classification using remote sensing data, utilizing source polarimetric SAR data and deep learning, in this case, an autoencoder. How do we do that? Just a framework, looks something like that. I have polarimetric SAR data. I do some pre-processing. And then I send it through a deep neural network structure. I do a classification, and I get a classification output, which is kind of a two-class problem over here because it's over here Arban or no Arban. Fine, that looks simple. Nothing great about it. Why do I need to do that? Because SAR data, they comes in a very large dynamic range, and I need to, let's say, compress the feature space using deep learning, some variant of deep learning. You have urban areas, which is in polarimetric SAR area. This is an area from Los Angeles. You can see what's going on over here. It's a bit strange. Why strange? At one go, you'll not be able to understand, but let me explain you what's strange over here. Strange. This is an urban area. This over here, red, is also an urban area. What do you see? This urban area, if you see on an optical image, what you see is that here is your azimuth. So my sensor is flying in this direction from here, from the bottom of the page to the top of the page, and is looking in this direction from left to right, looking over here. This area is tilted to the radar line of sight because radar is looking in this direction. This is oriented to the radar line of sight. And because of this orientation, there's a geometrical problem, and you are utilizing polarization. It shows that here green means cross polarization, HV. This is very high over here. This is also very high over here on areas which are natural areas, forest and agriculture, which means that if I use any kind of machine learning without this knowledge, take any of them, it will tell you this area is same as that area. That means it is same as vegetation. And this area is something different. But no, these two areas are urban areas. It's just that they have a different geometry in the look of the radar. There is a problem. And this is a major problem when we are utilizing polarimetric radar. That means I have this cross polarization, which is a signature should come from natural areas, is coming from an urban area, which is oriented. I cannot deal with this. This image, if you directly put into something, any classifier you name it, it will give you an output which is wrong. So the idea is, can I take this advantage of my knowledge? Because I know that. I know this from my scattering physics idea. That's what I mentioned over here. And that's what, that means I know it already. Can I take this idea from my domain knowledge and fix this? How can I fix this? I'll just let you know. The next point is that I am utilizing complex values. I'm utilizing, as I mentioned, the 3x3 covariance matrix. The covariance structure, as you have seen, is a complex domain. And doing complex values in a neural network, you will end up in trouble because you will have the back propagation, which is not analytic in nature. So there is a method which talks about complex value neural network. There's a totally subject on that. But to just avoid this, I can use it on the real domain. So the real domain, as I mentioned, is the Canyon space, is the 4x4 real domain. So I can do that, and because I have the background, the domain knowledge. What I do over here, as I said, I have this target, which is in a 0 degree, if you say, that means this is azimuth, this is 90 degree to the radar line of sight. So I have this orientation, this gives me problem. So can I generalize those target? Can I take a pixel and I rotate them in all possible directions, and I think, and this gives me my database of urban areas. I utilize the same thing over here. I do a generalized urban area, as I mentioned. So I rotate it for all possible things, and this gives me a large database, and I do my training on that. So I generalize an urban area database. I just do optimal feature extraction, which is the autoencoder part, and I just do supervised classification. Simple as that. Just the 3 steps. But again, as I mentioned, since I have a background knowledge, I know that these SAR data, they follow a typical distribution, the probability distribution. So I can introduce them as a texture parameter also, because here it was only geometrical parameter. At the end, when I'm doing classification, I can also put some texture parameters, which are nothing but some of the parameter estimated from a distribution which is already known in literature. So when I do this, this is the database. I rotate it, each one of them by rotation matrix, and I calculate the response. That's why I said respond in the training data set. And this is what I utilize to get my representation, input to output. This is the learned representation. I utilize them, and this is what I mentioned. If I don't know what is there inside, this is a black box to me, because this is where I have all these features which were linearly transformed, and I have just taken them to put it in my classifier. But can I see them? I mean, because there are so many of them, I just picked out arbitrarily any one of them, and I see, do I see anything over here? Because this is my image. Do I see something over here? And in some of them, yes, I see something. I see that there is a kind of a signature coming over here. But in others, maybe not. That means the neuron has fired something over here depending upon what was initiated, what was there. So depending upon some of them, I can say that it is not entirely black box. I mean, there is something going on, even though it's not linearly transforming, but still I am able to get an idea what's going on over there. So that means I'm trying to look into not a black box, but trying to get a feature out of it. And I just do some classification. I just want the results very quickly. If you see, this is the urban area. Here, this is an area which is also oriented to the radar line of sight. It shows as a green over here. But when I do a classification using the technique which I proposed over here, I get very well classified the urban areas. Over a same image, but for a different sensor, with different frequency, I get, again, good result. I compare it with the standard SVM. You all do it, or also with something called the Wishart is nothing but a maximum likelihood classifier. I see I'm unable to characterize this target, this area, which is an urban area. If you see, this is the area of San Francisco, it is tilted to the radar line of sight. The radar is flying from here to there. looking in this direction. Same problem. I'm unable to capture it. The same thing over here. So that means utilizing this information with the knowledge of physics, I'm able to do that. Quickly go into something like an urban change detection. It's very important because urban cities are growing. So what I'm doing is taking two data sets at time t0 and t1. I'm trying to do some pre-processing, and there's a comparison over here. And this is where I'm utilizing my knowledge of physics, and I'm finding out a change map and then doing the change detection. If I just talk about the same thing, I take it from here, the feature extracted, and then I do just a MLP at the end. This is the areas come from Los Angeles again. They are all co-registered L-band data sets. And if you see the results, there is a change over here in the urban area, and I'm able to very nice capture the urban area. It shows urban change, natural unchange, urban unchange. I'm able to capture very nice, again, utilizing my polarimetric SAR data, my knowledge, and again, an autoencoder to get the features, and just MLP to get a classified image, which is nothing but the change. Again, if you see over here, a change map, this is also nice because you see over here there is a change. There was no building constructed over here, this portion. This is what you have as a classified out. I go into something as a multi-frequency for crop classification. So you know that since we are changing the frequency of your sensor, you'll be getting different kinds of scattering from different kinds of target, and that will be utilized to infer differently this scattering from how can I incorporate them together and then utilize them to find out the classification. Because if I just do one by one, maybe it's not the correct way. So is there a way to some kind of fuse them? Well, fuse is a very layman term, but some way to incorporate them together to different kinds of frequencies and then utilize them. The idea is that I have two bands, C and L band, the same area at the same time, and they are co-registered. And what I utilize is a framework which we developed. It's called the tensorization framework, where I am just trying to incorporate kind of mix two information coming from two frequency data set. That means something like over here. Don't have to bother about the maths part of it, but just that I'm utilizing a mixed Kronecker product to make it together. So it's something like a fused. And then I'm utilizing this fused product over here, and I'm utilizing it in my classifier. This is again the same thing. I do it in the autoencoder based and taking it out and doing it as a maximum likelihood as an MLP classifier over here. And you can see that if I use C band, L band, and P band separately over here, so this is separately done with a reference image over here, you get this. This is the classification accuracies. If I combine them, I start getting better. If I do the CLP together with the tensorization framework, I get really, really high. But if I don't do this tensorization product, the question comes is, why do I need to do the tensorization product? I can just put them one after the other, like a stacking. Well, it doesn't work so well. So this is the augmentation one. I call it as an augmentation. So that means this is where I have the algorithms which kind of fuse the data from different frequencies, and then that is utilized in a machine learning approach to find out the final classified. So it shows also in the table that I am able to get much higher classification accuracy if I do that. Next one, I go to another application, which is snow cover. I go to cryosphere. It's very important again because we're talking about climate change. So snow cover mapping is very important. So how do I do snow cover? So that means again, if I have again a polarimetric SAR image. I take the image and I can utilize it and I put them into again a black box machine learning and I get it. But wait over here. What do we see? As I mentioned in my in the previous slides, is that I get the data, the polarimetric SAR data in H and V. Transmit an H, receive an H, an H and a V and a V and a V. This is the standard polarimetric SAR data I have in a basis which is horizontal vertical basis, an orthogonal system where I have the horizontal vertical. And if I just utilize it, I just have the data in one basis. But what do I have at my disposal? Since the data is fully polarimetric, I can change the basis. I can go from one basis to another. For example, I can go from an HV linear basis to a circular basis, and a right circular and a left circular. So that means I can simulate different bases. And if I simulate different bases, possibly I will get different information, because if I change my polarization structure, I get the scattering, which is different. But my measurement I have done in only H and V. But since I have the four measurement, I have the quad nature. I have the HH, HV, VV, and VH. I have the four. Of course, the three, because HH and HV and VH are similar for monostatic case. So I have the full polarimetric information. And when I have this, I have techniques to go into any other basis I want. So that's what I'm mentioning over here with this diagram, is that I can utilize different kinds of polarization structure. What happens is that I am getting this data, which is my observed data. I know that I am able to change the basis transformation utilizing techniques which are available. These are simple techniques just to do a unitary transformation, because you do not want to change the information, do not want to change the power and so on. So this is just some unitary transformation. I'm changing the unitary transformation and I'm making them as many other bases, as many as I can, infinite sets. But of course, I will just make it finite so that I can utilize them. So I make a finite set, as many as I want, because I can change both the different, as I said over here, you can change both the orientation and ellipticity angle, because this is, you have the orientation, which is the orientation of the ellipse, and you have the ellipticity angle, which is you can have a linear or a circular, which is the two extremities. In between, you have all possible ellipses. So if I utilize them, I have over here now a database which is collated on the basis of polarization basis transform. Just think about the example which you have seen for urban. There I was collating the data which was based on my orthogonal, the transformation which was just the orthogonal to the radar line of sight. That was the transformation which I was using for making this different database. Here, I am changing the basis element over here. So if I utilize them over here, I can again find out the feature vector from here. And then I utilize the same thing over here. Now you can see I have for the jth pixel, I have this as my vector. So it's a vector where I have the n cross ns vector, and this is what I utilize. This is an area, the study area is over Manali Dhundi in Himachal Pradesh, which is we have utilized a lot, and we have done some field work. We also have the optical data sets available over here. This is the area. Manali is somewhere here when my cursor is pointing, so it is just missing Manali. So you can just go hop over here, and it's a higher altitude. This area is entirely snow covered with lots of topography. This is in the time of March around. So it's heavily snowfall was there. So this is the area, and this is the image from a Landsat image, and this is the NDSI. So this is the Landsat false color composite. You can say this is the snow and this is vegetation. This is the forest over here. It's not a very dense forest, but it is a sparse but frozen forest. It's frozen at that time of the year. So it's frozen and sparse. This is the forest area over here, and this is all mostly snow covered. So if I utilize my parameters, if I try to extract my first of all, I would like to understand what type of scattering is happening over here. So what I'm doing, I want to stop, not going to machine learning directly from here, but understand the physical nature of the scattering from such kind of an area. What do you see? I have this image from March 2015, snow covered. I have this image from August, same area, exactly same area, totally record registered. I have this from August. Snow has melted. Of course, in August, it's very hot. Everything has melted except for the few peaks, high peaks. And you can see this is snow free. This is where I just showed the scattering phenomena. If you see in this part, I have snow covered, which is coming from the snow covered area. I have over here the areas which are in green, which means that this is coming from something like a volume. What does it mean over here? That means here the snow has fallen, so it's very fresh snow, which is called dry snow. So my radar waves have penetrated the snow to a certain extent, and I have the scattering which is coming from some bulk of the snow, some portion of the bulk of the snow. So this is where I get some kind of a volumetric scattering over here, some kind of a roughness and so on. But when the snow has melted, everything is flat, more or less flat. I am getting totally something which is coming from an odd bounce, something which is characterized by, I don't know, some single bounce, odd bounce, or a surface kind of scattering, which is true because there is no more snow left. Everything has melted over here. Sorry. So I get a difference over here in the mechanism of the scattering. So which means that, well, I'll be able to utilize this information. That means, well, there is snow. So that means I'll be able to understand snow covered utilizing these kind of data sets. Now, when I start seeing this is a reference map which is made from the NDSI. I'm seeing that I have the utilizing all the orientation angles. I am able to get this as the classified or finally the snow map, which is fairly good, not bad. If I use a particular polarization, I use only the circular one, then things becomes bad compared to this when I'm utilizing all possible combinations. When I use a linear polarization, only linear polarization, not so good again. If I use something like the pi by 4, that means my transmit is a pi by 4 with an axis. This is really, really noisy. That means when I'm trying to see over here, I'm seeing that when I'm utilizing possibly all polarization, all what I'm doing the transformation, I'm utilizing all of them, it's fairly good. But when I'm utilizing only the linear polarization, with just the data which I have, maybe it's missing out many different things. So I also try to see how much is the snow cover percentage, and that's what you get over here. This is the NDSI. NDSI is always doing good, provided you have an optical data which is cloud free. That is quite difficult, which is unfortunately impossible. We were lucky to get only one Landsat 8 data, but close to our acquisition date, but not on the acquisition date, very close. So we could make an NDSI image out of it. And if you can see that it is, the percentage is around 72% over here, which is quite high. But for the SAR data, even if you utilize all of them, the SAR data is not bad. It's performing quite well, not very far from that. So if I use again the linear, the circular, and the pi by 4, well, I don't have so good results. So it's because I am not utilizing exhaustive information. And since I have a fully polarimetric SAR data, why not? I change the basis and I try to get all the information. So in a nutshell, what I'm doing over here is that I have the measurement. I utilize the pulsar data. I use the basis transformation, which is the general polarization. I say the general polarization representation, which is the generalization of this one. And I get all this generalized data set. And I extract the feature from here, just nothing but the components out of it. There's no feature as such, just a component. I put it into classifier and I get down. I do an AE and an MLP. I do an MLP only. And I just do a SVM linear, just to give it show an idea that what's happened if I just use these a mixture of them. So if you can see, if I do a proposed, which is the one which I have, I use an MLP but no AE. Then I have not so good as the one proposed, and it gets worse if I do an SVM, no AE, only linear. So there is no autoencoder based, not a feature, and it is only the linear polarization. It's fairly bad compared to the other two. What it shows, it tells us that if I utilize the information of the fully polarimetric data scene and I try to incorporate all the information coming from them in terms of all the polarization information, which again I say that it is again physics driven or your domain knowledge driven, and then I utilize a machine learning technique, I am able to achieve better result if I would have just taken the data and just put them in only a linear basis. That's it. So if I just see the accuracy, sometimes the numerical results, you can see that, well, they are fairly very high if I use all of them. So another one is the last one. I would say this is a regression. There's a regression using again a machine learning technique, autoencoder, but a different form of autoencoder. Is not the fully connected kind of one, but different autoencoder. But what I'm doing over here, I'm inputting just the information which is from the backscatter coefficient, and here I'm trying to jointly find out the information coming from the two biophysical parameters, the PAI and the wet biomass. So jointly finding out them, because why jointly? Because they are correlated. If I just find out one of them at one go, then I'm losing the correlation. So I would like to keep the correlation between them. So that's why I'm doing a joint using this BioFinet. This is the area where I'm using. This is the area of Manitoba in Canada, where I have this number of crops, and I have this ascending and descending scene coming from this my LARSAT2 data. If I try to see that I am getting better utilizing this kind of a structure, then if I just use a multi-target random forest-based approach. It's also multi-target, but a different approach, of course. I'm able to get good R value with a very low RMSE compared to the this one for soybean, both for PI and biomass. Same thing happens again for canola. Also, we are getting better. So what is happening here? It's a network based. So network based, this is a sequence to sequence architecture, and which jointly estimates PI and the biomass, and which then holds the intercorrelation between the output. Well, you can use that for, of course, any crops. And this shows the high sensitivity to PI and biomass, and you can see all these things. What we have shown is that we have a good less RMSE compared to the other methods, and this can be useful for further study for yield and so on. I come to the final slide, summary. So as I mentioned, the first slide is that we are here doing remote sensing, geospatial technology to be in general. And the data sets which we are dealing with is remote sensing. And this data set is very high, is information rich. So the precise knowledge of this data and their representation is very important, is vital. And since we all have our own domain of working, either it is urban agriculture, forestry, whatever, we have our precise domain knowledge. And this is very crucial for our application also. So we have the representation of data and we have the precise domain knowledge. What I'm trying to say over here is that I'm trying to emphasize mostly is that we are doing machine learning with physics. It's physics driven machine learning. One point is that we are utilizing the tractable feature learning, feature engineering, sorry. So you are doing a feature engineering from the data sets at the first instant. And this is tractable. You know what you have done because you know it follows a model. This model is known to you from your background. You can augment your loss function, as I mentioned, with a term derived from physics. You have your normal, I would say, normal loss function. But you can also have a loss function incorporated with your standard loss function with something coming from physics. The other point is, can you understand the compressed representation? We say that we are putting some data on one side and on the other side we're taking the output out, and that's it. Inside, it's a black box. Let's say when I'm doing autoencoder, I know, well, there is a encoder decoder between there is a code. And this is what I'm trying to utilize. So can I take this code and try to, look into them and see if I can get some meaningful information? Maybe yes, maybe not. Well, I don't say every time you'll get something meaningful, but trying to get one step ahead is that not only getting the output is important, but understanding this compressed representation of the remote sensing data. Which targets are you are able to see, and maybe some targets in the representation maybe are not there at all. Maybe in some of the branches, in some of the cases. So understanding this complex representation is sometimes very useful because you get an insight of what may be possibly what's going on. Can you come back and you track it back or so on? And as I mentioned again, the essential augmentation to physics model and statistical description in the classification process. So can I augment? Because I have physical models. That's what I showed in example. I have physical model and I know this coming from the very scattering physics model. And I have control over this. What I don't have control is the black box. So I have control over this physical model. One more thing which I know that is that all these data sets which I have at our disposal, the fully polarimetric SAR data, channel-wise information, all, they have very beautiful statistical description. These are beautiful descriptions which we can get from statistics. Statistics, information, geometry, and so on and so forth. If you go, it's a totally different talk altogether. I won't go to that, but if you are interested, you can look into that. You can get very, very nice information coming out from the polypolarimetric SAR data using information theory, on which is also called information geometry. Can I incorporate them in the process of classification or regression if you are doing, which may enhance your output? So this is what I want to say is that this is machine learning in remote sensing, but it is driven by our own knowledge of the domain. Thank you very much for your patience.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have some questions from the participants.
Yes, please.
Okay, sir. Avinash Das, Sri Avinash Das, can you please ask the question?
Hello.
Yeah.
So my question is this, that for deep learning, is it required to have the training data set and the testing data set both of same resolution? Like I am basically working with the DEM data. So one of the DEM data which is already of a you can say a well established model. So I want to use that particular model training data and give my own testing data, and which is my one is of around 10-meter resolution, and the established one is around of 56 meter. So can I do the testing on that? Is it dependent on the resolution, or is it not dependent on the resolution?
Well, the answer would be I would say in some case yes or no, yes and no, because it depends upon what exactly are you doing the application. I would look into that, because if your training data is not capturing exactly what you want to have at the output, then no, it doesn't make any sense to utilize them as a training data. But if you are saying that you have a data set which is one is 20 meter, the other is 56 meter, you said, isn't it?
10
Something like
meter
that.
and 56 meter.
Yeah. So 10 meters. So if you are if there is the problem which you are dealing with is a kind of a area or something which is kind of there's an homogeneity. So the homogeneity will maybe is captured by both of them. So if whatever you can see maybe in 10 meter, possibly 56 meter also there's a homogeneity. But for example, if you are looking at something which is some kind of a structural information, which requires a high resolution, which is around a 10 meter thing, and another one which is of course not available on a 56 meter. So then, well, it is of no use. But if your application is on, for example, let's say I am working on finding out something on large forest area, Amazon, or I'm trying to do it over oceans, for example. So it fairly doesn't matter if I maybe have something which is of low resolution or a high resolution, because I'm trying to capture the same homogeneity in the data. But if I say I have an urban area, look at 10 meter urban area, if I try to see, will give me more information. But if I have 56 meter, well, I am losing the so it's all contextual based, I would say. If your application demands that it is an homogeneous area and you are able to capture the information which you want to have both in training and in testing, then it's okay. But otherwise, I would say it's not going to solve any purpose.
So in my particular case, I am working on CNN for lineament extraction, basically. Not exactly
Okay.
lineament. So for creator identification, creator extraction. So I'll be using template matching as well. So
Okay.
will it be workable or will it not in
Well,
this context? Yes.
I don't even answer will it work or not, because if it doesn't work and I say a yes, you will catch me.
No,
So,
sir.
so the
So in
thing
a
is,
generalized way,
yeah,
can
yeah,
it be possible or not?
yeah,
Like,
maybe yes, it is possible on a sense, because since no, you have kind of lineament can be of any structures, possibly because they can be of any structure. So possibly if you take it on a different resolution, maybe you will be able to capture all possible. But if you are saying that, well, I'll be capturing only lineament of one particular geometry or orientation, then possibly not, because it may not be there in both the data sets. But in here, this case, I would say, since you will have an homogeneous of all possible orientation and kind of lineament, it might work in that sense. But you have to do it and let me know about if it works or not. I'll be
Thank
happy
you,
to.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
you.
sir. The next is from Sri Nisha Elsa Varghese.
Hello, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
You have mentioned in your presentation about image clustering using scattering physics rather than ML approach. So my question is, can we use this technique for images other than remote sensing images? Or if so, how can we ensure the accuracy with this technique with the basic ML approach like K-means algorithm?
Okay, so you want to say that you have non-remote sensing images. Can you please unmute Nisha?
Elsa.
Hello,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah. So if I can get your question correctly, so you are
For example, remote sensing rather than remote sensing. For example, biomedical images.
okay. So you want to utilize biomedical images and you want to use it with some machine learning technique?
No, sir, not machine learning
Our
technique.
question
That
is,
is, you have mentioned scattering type or purity index in scattering physics you have mentioned. So I'm asking about that clustering technique.
Oh, okay, okay. Sorry. Maybe I didn't get the point. Okay, now I got it. Well, I can give you in this question in an answer in a different way. So, well, I do not know much about biomedical imaging, but you have, so the point is of understanding the modality of imaging first. Okay, so biomedical imaging, fine, but biomedical imaging by what kind of method? You have a computer tomography image or any other kind of image. So if that imaging modality tells you something about the different properties, the structure of, let's say, if you are looking at cells or tissues or something, if it tells you about the structure, some kind of an homogeneity of them, some kind of other, I don't know, some physical properties also, then it is possible, well, I would say not exactly what I mentioned over here, like scattering, whatever you have said, purity, no, maybe not exactly those, but there are other kind of parameters or features which can be extracted from these kind of images. For example, if you go to computer tomographic images, you can extract many kind of different morphological structures, morphological parameters, which they can extract from this these very nice computer tomographic images. Morphology, I don't know whether you know about this. Morphology, stereology is a branch. I would like to refer you to Professor B.S. Dayasagar. He's a specialist in this. You can look into his work. He does a lot of work in this domain. And this is a wonderful field where you can extract this kind of information, but from a different physical point of view. This is not scattering as such, but trying to get kind of a geometry information, geometry, stereology information. And that is coming from the domain. So the one who is a biologist or a doctor will be able to tell, well, this makes any sense or not. And the person who is doing the extraction of this information from a morphological parameters will be able to tell whether, well, they make a sense or not in terms of the imaging they are having. So then these features then can be incorporated into whatever machine learning you use. What you are doing, the same thing what I am doing over here. Here, my information is scattering physics, where I am having a radar data where I know the scattering is in this way. In that, you are trying to get it out of a modality of the imaging, and you are trying to get information from a biological point of view, and that, if it is meaningful, you are able to put that into your machine learning. I hope this makes sense. Or
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from Sri Shashikant.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon. I'm Sasigant Sahu. I'm doing my PhD in IIT Roorkee.
Okay.
Sir, I'm a big fan of you. Actually,
Oh.
I have seen a lot of papers.
I'm a fan.
Yeah, actually, I have seen a lot of papers regarding radar, and I am one of the objective is micro remote sensing for detecting buried channels and geological structures in third deserts using different scattering mechanisms. And sir, my question is whether different decomposition techniques along with scattering mechanisms can be useful for detecting this structure and buried channels. And second one is how machine learning will be helpful for my study using these data sets. Like I am using Sentinel and ALOS archive data, where I use BV and VS dual polarized data in Sentinel-1 and HH and HB in ALOS 2 data. So can it be possible, sir, using different archive data in machine learning algorithms for detecting better channel detection?
Okay. Thank you, Shashikant, for this question. It's a very good question indeed. One thing before I answer your question, I would like to ask you one question: is that have you found out any buried channel?
Yes, sir. I found 3-4 channels, and I will go for a better GPR survey in these channels, along these channels. And I also collected some river sediments data to
Okay.
analyze whether there is somehow fluvial sediments.
Okay. Okay. Good. Very good. So to answer your first question is that uh, see, there are, I mean, few things which I mean we need to understand is that what how are we able to find out this buried channel? So these are paleo channels which are buried under sand. So these are sand, and then you have the buried channel. Now,
Yes, sir.
why are we? How are we able to find them out? If I use an optical image, maybe we will not, because there will be no signature at all on the surface.
Right, sir.
Now, the point is, well, we have something at our disposal, which is radar. Let us try to look into radar. And sometimes people say, well, radar is the holy grail. It will tell you everything, all stories. No, sorry. There are limitations. So we need to know the limitations first. Now, the limitations are in this way. Now, at what depth are these channels? Now,
Right.
I have a sediment or some sand layer, and then I have, I don't know, few meters, kilometer,
Yes.
whatever it is, there are
Yes.
channels. I
Right.
use a radar data which is in C band, maybe an L band. This is only few centimeters of wavelength. Okay. I have the sand to be really, really dry. Rajasthan, I would say Rajasthan, where you have the paleo channels, and well, you have in extreme heat, you have dry condition, totally dry condition. Possibly the electromagnetic wave will penetrate to a certain depth, and then it will be getting deattenuated. It will be gone
Right.
over
Right.
there. Now the thing is, with a C band, it's not possible to penetrate if you have few meters. I mean, on the
Right.
superficial, if you have, you will be able to get a signature. Now, why this signature you are getting? Because of the change of the dielectric property between the top surface and those
Right.
paleo channels, which possibly have a dielectric property higher than the above. So there is a dielectric constant contrast which is there. That is the basic principle.
Right, sir.
Now the point is, how much depth? Now you say, well, C band, it is shorter wave. Let me go to an L band. I go to a longer wavelength than L band, 23 centimeter. How much can it go? Imagine you just have a little bit of wetness, I would say, but little bit of wetness in that sand. It is gone. You will not be able to detect anything at all. So you
Right.
need really special condition, one, where you can really detect these channels which are buried much much lower. No, you cannot do that. So these are,
Yes.
I'm not discouraging you, I'm just giving the truth.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir,
Yes, you are muted, Sachikant.
Sir, sir, the next question
No,
is
the question is it's not over the answer, Sachikant. Yes. So
Yes,
the
sir.
idea is that I would say you to understand first these signatures, what you are, that's my question was to you, that could you find any channel? And your answer was yes. And that is
Sir, one of my idea was to detect the river sediments, whether if there is channel or not. But if there is a channel, there should be any river sediments like pebbles, cobbles, and boulders type. And in that area, we get some high volume scatterings.
yes,
Rather than the single bounce or these scatterings.
right.
So detecting that volume scattering in more enhance the this volume scattering, or whether we can go for a different deeper decomposition techniques or any?
Yes, you can go for a decomposition technique, but I would suggest to first look into the individual channel wise, because decomposition, when you do this decomposition, these are on a higher information content, so you do not know exactly why they're happening. So I would say just do something like a VH by VV kind of thing, so ratio,
Sir,
something like that.
right, sir. I am
Yeah,
doing
so
now
Mr. Shashikant,
only,
we'll have, I think
VVH.
maybe later on you can have some separate discussion. Sir, we'll have other
Right,
questions.
right,
Time
sir,
is
right,
short.
sir.
Okay.
Yeah,
No
so-
worry, no worry, sir.
So
Okay.
just do whatever you are doing, decomposition will work, and machine learning do if it is required.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Okay, we can
Okay.
discuss later on if you are
Right.
interested.
Sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Srija Das. Srija Das. Okay, we'll move to the next one. The next question is from Sri Ashish Paul. Ashish Paul, are you there? Okay. Next is Sri Shubha. Shubha, are you there? Sir, I think everybody, they might have left.
It's lunchtime, people are hungry.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir, hello, sir. I am Devashish Chakraborty. Just one
Yes.
question I am having actually. Sir, as you mentioned that as we understand from your lecture that only that is main thing for identification or classification. Not only that machine learning will work, but one important thing that physics of microwave remote sensing also is very much important for classification or segmentation of microwave image, so that we could understand. Only one thing, sir, as you mentioned that feature engineering is one of the important thing. So whether that is, we have seen that texture is one of the major important for microwave remote sensing. So in that case, whether a texture alone can be useful for some sort of classification or segmentation of microwave image.
Yes, a good question. Yes, possibly yes, but as you can, if you go back and see the previous one of the slides where I showed for urban classification, I am doing the feature engineering mainly from the from the physical point of view, which is kind of a geometrical changing by just unitary rotation. But at the end, when I incorporate them to the machine learning part, there only I am injecting some of the features which are texture information, and those texture informations are coming from nothing but some parameter estimation from the statistical point of view, statistical models which are defining the data. Your question is very good. Yes, you can. For example, if you think that, and as you have on your question, as you mentioned, I am only telling from my point of view, from my research point of view about radar data, but it can do it for any data sets you have. It can be other remote sensing data, any other data sets which are non-remote sensing also, if you have the background knowledge. As I mentioned, physics, because it is just the way as you try to do that. But the thing is, yes, you can incorporate texture information inside your classifier, or when you can want to put it, you can go through an autoencoder based. But provided you know those texture information comes from what. So these texture information have some meaning from the domain knowledge which you are using. For example, I just give an example very quickly. For example, if you are utilizing an optical data and you say, I want to get the Aralic features. The Aralic features give the texture information. My idea over here is leaving a few of them. the Aralic parameters, the Aralic texture features. Do I understand all of them? Maybe not from all context point of view. But if I take those which I know have a meaning from those application point of view, and then take those and do a feature engineering, maybe that is useful, much more useful than utilizing all of them, which I do not know what they're doing actually. So your question, of course, is valid. You can do that. What I want to mention in this talk and what I mentioned in doing from physics point of view is physics is a general term I'm using over here. You can see, but yes, you can do texture, and the texture should also have some physical meaning. So I've just given an example. So for example, for SAR also there are textures which come from probabilistic models. And when I do some estimation of the parameters, some of the parameters, they have physical information. Some of them tells me about the roughness. Some of them tells me about the scale of the intensity backscattered. So I can use them also. Well, I'm not used in this example, but in somewhere else I have used it. So yes, it is useful. But what I want to say is that whatever you are using it, if you have a good grip or an understanding of them, and then you putting it to an autoencoder based or a CNN, whatever you are doing, in order to get a bit more understanding of those features, and then you are doing a feature engineering and then putting it. If that's answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. So nicely you have answered.
Oh, I'm happy.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Hey, Miss Dimple Shahjahan, do you have a question? Last one.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, I just want to know that you mentioned about change detection, right? For urban change detection, which data set is like SAR images or LiDAR data sets are more suitable for this urban change detection? How can we compare like SAR data sets and LiDAR data sets? Which one is more?
Okay, you're asking me which one to use? Well, if you are asking me, then of course
gives more accuracy if we go for 3D like change detection, right? And for 3D reconstruction also, urban reconstruction.
Okay, it's a tough question, but if you tell me which one to use, I will always tell you to use SAR data because I come from them. And if it is LiDAR, you can ask Professor Rao. So he can tell you, he will tell that. So we will fight among each other. So we'll fight among each other. So, so the thing is, well, I do not know about LiDAR data. I mean, I just have seen them. I have not worked with them. Dr. Ramarao can tell better to you. But for SAR, I know that it works in many cases because it captures well the backscatter intensity along with the geometry. And I can utilize both of them for urban. But yes, there are the different issues which might have, and always if you can use another data set. So these days I am trying to work with some of my collaborators in India and abroad to use multimodal data set, because I can tell you that, as I said, SAR data will give you, but if I use a multimodal set, I use a combination. Why not utilize both of them together? I mean, I'm not saying that, well, this is SAR is only LiDAR separately. Use a multimodal way. If you want to really have a feature which is the elevation and so on and so forth, maybe LiDAR is much better in that sense. If I want to use PolSAR data, then I have to go into another technology which is PolInSAR, polarimetric SAR interferometry. And I'm not talked about that, but it's a different technology altogether. So if I want to have scattering and then scattering along with the height, I would have to go to this PolInSAR dataset to get extra information. But if I only have PolSAR dataset and I can incorporate LiDAR information along with that, well, I think that's much better. So I may not be able to tell you which one is better. You have to do it and see along what it is. But I would recommend, if possible, to utilize both at some point. Maybe at the beginning you cannot give it together, but maybe at some point you can look into that.
Sir, the data sets which you have used, are they freely available, like publicly available data?
Some of them yes, some of them not. Some of them yes are available.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Professor Avik Bhattacharya. It's a really wonderful session that we all have. And, a lot of things are there. And thank you very much. I, thank you for spending for this time. And we break for lunch now. And as Professor Bhattacharya is going to continue the next session at 3 p.m. And I specifically suggest the participants take care of the presence of his, time here, because Professor Avik has been chief editor for several top-rated journals, and it is imperative that we should be having a first-hand account of the tricks, tips, and also the ways of, enhancing our publication rate, and also finding out where most of us fail to make it, or what are some issues. So these are all something which will be very valuable to hear from the persons who are going to actually decide and going to face up with the problems from the others. So I suggest that we should be taking benefit of the full extent. And thank you very much, Professor Avik. We'll come
Thank
back
you,
immediately at 3 p.m.
So I'll be back at 3 o'clock.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you. See you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, all of you. See you. Bye-bye.